U.S. bombers for the second time in 2 days have killed dozens of civilians in eastern Afghanistan, as well as friendly Mujahideen fighters supporting their battle against al-Qaeda. Mujahideen commanders said hundreds of people, overwhelmingly civilians, may have been killed by U.S. bombing over the weekend. As U.S. warplanes continue to pound Afghanistan this weekend, a peace march led by family members of September 11th attack victims arrived in New York to call for an end of the bombing of Afghanistan. The march began more than a week ago in Washington, D.C., and wound its way up the East Coast with marchers leafleting and speaking in Baltimore, Philadelphia, Paterson, New Jersey, and other cities along the way, sleeping in churches at night. The family members are part of a growing network of people who lost loved ones in the September 11th attacks, yet have spoken out against the U.S. policies being carried out in their name. We're joined right now by two of the people who walked. David Potorti is with us. He lost his brother in the World Trade Center attacks. And Barry Amundson, who lost his brother Craig Amundson in the attack on the Pentagon, both, of course, on September 11th, joining us in the Firehouse studio. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
It's good to have you with us. I'm looking at a piece in yesterday's New York Times. No, sorry, not a piece. We wouldn't go that far. It's a photograph. And it's in the section called A Nation Challenged, Portraits of Grief. And it's a picture of you, David Potorti, and Amber Amundson, the widow of Craig Amundson. And the line underneath it says, Amber Amundson, whose husband Craig was killed at the Pentagon, was flanked at a Union Square vigil yesterday by Mr. Amundson's brother Ryan Amundson at left and David Potorti, whose brother James Potorti died in the World Trade Center. There are signs, but you can't read all the signs, and Amber is wearing an American flag. No indication what your message has been.
Yeah, apparently we did a PR walk. And just to set this up, we had just spent an hour and a half in Union Square Park being interviewed by the Daily News and the Post and 1010 Wins and various other people, while the reporter and the photographer from the New York Times were standing there taking our picture. We stood in a circle, we made speeches, we talked about what we had done, why we had done it, and we saw this picture. And we said we were just outraged.
So the picture is closely cropped. I do see one sign that says "Walk to D.C." and
right.
I see in another poster it says P.E., but we don't get the piece.
Phys Ed. We walked for Phys Ed, apparently, yeah.
Well, can you talk about why you took this walk?
Well, I can talk about why I personally took this walk. You know, I lost my brother, and in the immediate aftermath of the war, I was really angry at the coverage. You know, I live in a free country, and when everybody on television is saying the same thing, this little red flag goes up in your head when you're hearing the same message and the same framing of that message and the same lack of alternatives in the media, whether it's ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN. They were all saying exactly the same thing. So for me, it was anger, and I wanted to just go out in the real world and see if that's really the way it was, because everybody I knew, including my dad, who's a Marine vet, were really quite somber about this horrible tragedy, and they weren't calling for blood. They weren't calling for a quick solution and let's start dropping the bombs. They were quite calm and reasonable. So I wanted to go out in the real world and sort of see what was going on. And what I found in doing this walk is that most of the people I met are quite calm and reasonable and looking for alternatives to this war. You know, as a family member, people say, what did you want immediately after these attacks? And what I wanted was a very strong showing of force. But there's many ways to be strong, and there's many kinds of force. There's legal force, moral force, ethical force. We can bring all of those to bear on this. It doesn't have to be military force.
Who was your brother? Where did he work?
He worked on the 95th floor of the first tower to be hit. So it took us till Friday to figure out where he was, because we didn't know exactly what the floor plan of his floor was. And someone who actually observed the plane hitting his building informed us that it had taken out 8 floors of the building. His floor was one of them. So as best as we know, one of the sad things is that we don't know what happened to him.
What did he do in the World Trade Center?
He was a vice president at Marsh & McLennan, so he was a systems analyst, computer guy. So that's one of the sadnesses, is we don't know what he was doing and what happened to him, but we do know that we're not going to find any of him, and that's sad too.
When you talked to the New York Times, did you talk to the New York Times yesterday?
Did you? I didn't talk to a reporter from the New York Times.
No. Barry Amundson?
I didn't talk to a reporter either.
I wonder why they sent a reporter if they just have a photograph. But Barry Amundson, why don't you talk about your brother Craig?
Okay.
We talked to Amber, his widow, on the telephone during the walk, but what did he do at the Pentagon?
My brother was a graphic designer at the Pentagon. He was actually an enlisted Army person there who worked for the Deputy Chief of Staff of, there's a huge acronym for it, I can't remember it right now, but basically the Pentagon, above being, or apart from being, a military center, is an office, and he was a designer that supported people who make presentations and things there. The plane that hit there went through his office, a big new area that was more or less, other people in it referred to it as cubicle land. It was brand new and sort of a part of the Army modernizing its operations there. And yeah, he was an enlisted Army person and also working with what he liked to do with actually art and computers and design related things.
And he was at the Pentagon the morning of September 11th.
Excuse me?
He was at the Pentagon the morning of September 11th.
Yes, yes.
So why did you decide to go on this walk from the Pentagon to the World Trade Center?
Well, I have similar experiences to David as well. In meeting up with my family in the days after that, one of the things that we first said to each other was that we were saddened by the fact that we thought that there was going to be a military action that was probably going to hurt and kill more innocent people around the world. We didn't know where it was going to be, but we all felt for sure that something like this was going to happen. And that on top of this as well, was an unbearable feeling for all of us. And I guess I must say that my family runs, the gamut of politics, but we all felt that way. So I guess we feel. I feel a certain kinship with the people who have died here, as well as the people who have died around the world in war that are innocents.
Have you been able to share your views with a wider audience? I mean, in terms of the media coverage of you as a family member of a victim of the attacks.
Actually, my brother has been pretty active in doing that. This is one of the first times that I've talked. I was on public radio in Missouri once in a call-in show, and I guess my brother Ryan and I have spent a lot of time talking about these things. So when he speaks, he also speaks for me. But I wanted to be here as well.
We're also joined in the studio, by the way, I'm glad you came in, by Milan Ray, who's a longtime British peace activist, founder of Voices in the Wilderness UK, and author of the book Chomsky's Politics. You are headed to Iraq tomorrow. Voices of the Wilderness was the organizer of this walk from Washington to New York.
That's right. We're leaving tomorrow to go to Baghdad.
And what about this latest news of the intensification of planning for a war against Iraq? The London Observer reporting that President Bush has ordered the CIA and senior military commanders to draw up detailed plans for a military operation against Iraq that could begin within months.
The idea for our delegation has been for some time that we are trying to draw attention to the humanitarian crisis in Iraq, which is currently being caused by economic sanctions and the possible impact on ordinary families from war. And we've long felt that there was a very real risk that there would be a major assault on Iraq designed to change the leadership of Iraq, but which could also have a very serious impact on the civilian population. And so our purpose in going, and there's going to be an extended delegation for perhaps 7 weeks, and our intention is to go even if it's threatened, strikes are threatened to occur while we're there. Our intention is to try and communicate to people that there isn't just one man who lives in Iraq, but there are 22 million people who live in Iraq, and we want to show what the consequences could be for ordinary families.
I'm reading this story in a British paper where you come from. What is the attitude of those in Britain to the possible expansion of the U.S. bombing campaign with Britain's help?
Well, it's very unusual for Voices in the Wilderness UK to be heading somewhat in the same direction as the British government, but it is pretty clear that Tony Blair and his government have been trying to restrain the US administration from going to attack Iraq. However, our Prime Minister has a track record of falling in behind the USA as soon as a policy is declared firmly, and unfortunately that would be my expectation, that once that is a firm policy decision, Britain will fall in behind that. There is an anti-war movement in Britain, and there have been some large demonstrations, and I think that movement would continue to protest against military retaliation and the expansion of the war on terrorism if it expanded to Iraq.
David Potorti, you wrote a piece that did not appear on in a newspaper, but was at alternate.org. Can you share the beginning of it with us?
Yeah, I woke up on October 8th, which was a Monday, and it was the morning after we started the bombing, and turned on NPR as I was having breakfast, and there's Bob Edwards, very cheerful, and welcomed Cokie Roberts to weigh in on the bombing, and he said, Cokie, leaders of Congress were quick to issue a statement in support of military action in Afghanistan. And he asked her if there were any dissenters, and she said none that mattered. And I thought this was just an astonishing statement from a journalist, from anybody really, because it doesn't really say anything. It says everything, but it doesn't say anything. And if you're a reporter, let's talk about the dissent, because there was dissent. And so I took that phrase, none that mattered, and just applied it to a whole bunch of other things, sort of as the phrase that informs U.S. foreign policy. And it really does. When you talk about, you can just talk about the Kyoto Summit. Did any significant criticisms of U.S. energy policies emerge? None that mattered. Are the militaristic responses to the terrorist attacks likely to endanger the lives of more American civilians? None that matter. So it's this term that just sort of dismisses all criticism. And I don't think of criticism as a negative thing. I like criticism because criticism improves me and it improves everything. So the reaction I got to this, I've never really had an article on the internet before. This thing got picked up by about 15 websites. It's in Australia, it's in Canada, it's in France, it's in Holland. So I feel in my little way I touched a nerve somewhere. And people sort of agree with this, I like to think.
Well, I hope it gets as much attention in this country as it does around the world. Again, it's at alternate.org, and I want to thank our guests for being with us. David Potorti, his brother James Potorti, was killed at the World Trade Center on September 11th. Craig Amundson died at the Pentagon on September 11th, and we have been joined by his brother, and Milan Ray, longtime British peace activist, founder of Voices in the Wilderness, with us as well. That does it for the program Democracy Now! In Exile.